The cabin wasn't on Google Maps. That should have been the first sign. But when you're tired, excited, and already hours into a drive, small red flags feel like nothing. They feel like details you'll laugh about later. Mark and Lena found the listing on a short-term rental site. Secluded cabin retreat. No neighbors. Total privacy. The photos showed a small wooden cabin surrounded by tall trees, a fire pit, and a porch that faced nothing but darkness. They wanted quiet. They wanted space. They wanted to disappear for a weekend. By the time they left the main road, it was already dark. The GPS told them to turn onto a gravel road with no sign, no lights, and no cell service. The trees swallowed the car almost immediately, their branches arching overhead like a tunnel. "Are you sure this is right?" Lena asked. Mark checked the direction screenshot he'd saved earlier. "Yeah, it says 3 miles down this road." The gravel popped under the tires. The headlights barely reached past the trees. Every now and then, the road dipped suddenly, making Lena grab the door handle. They passed an old, rusted mailbox. No name, no number, just bent metal and peeling paint. 5 minutes later, the cabin appeared. It looked exactly like the photos. That was the second sign. The porch light was already on. Mark frowned. "Did they say someone would be here?" "No," Lena said. Self-check-in. They sat in the car for a moment, engine idling. The woods were silent. Not peaceful. Empty. Mark shook it off. Probably a timer. They grabbed their bags and stepped out. The air smelled damp. Wet leaves, soil, something faintly metallic. The porch boards creaked under their weight. The door unlocked easily. Inside, the cabin was clean. Too clean. Fresh towels. No dust. Fireplace stocked with wood. A guest book lay open on the table. Lena flipped through it. The last entry was dated 3 years ago. "That's weird," she said. "No recent guests?" Mark shrugged. "Maybe they don't update it." They unpacked, lit the fireplace, and tried to relax. For a while, it worked. They cooked dinner, drank wine, laughed about city life. The fire cracked softly. Rain began tapping against the roof. Then the power went out. Total darkness. "No problem," Mark said. "Cabin life." He grabbed a flashlight from their bag. That's when they heard footsteps. Outside. Slow. Heavy. Purposeful. Mark froze. "Did you hear that?" Lena whispered. The footsteps stopped. They waited. Nothing. Mark told himself it was an animal. Deer. Maybe a bear. But animals don't walk like that. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Lena noticed something else. The bedroom window didn't lock. Just a loose latch. "Mark," she whispered. "This window." Before she could finish, a loud knock hit the front door. Not pounding. Not frantic. 3 slow knocks. Mark grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the door. "Hello?" he called. No answer. Another knock. Closer this time. From the side of the cabin. Lena's phone showed no service. Mark looked through the peephole. Nothing. When he opened the door, the porch was empty. But the fire pit had been used. Fresh ash. Still warm. Someone had been there. They locked the door, stacked a chair under the handle, and turned off the lights. That's when they noticed the third thing. The cabin had no address number anywhere. Not on the door. Not on the mailbox. Not on the rental listing. If they needed help, how would anyone find them? Around 2 a.m., the knocking came back. This time from the bedroom wall. From outside. Lena started crying. Mark whispered, "Don't move." A voice spoke through the wall. Low, calm. "You left the fire burning." Mark's blood went cold. "We don't want trouble," Mark said loudly. "We're leaving in the morning." The voice chuckled. "You shouldn't have come after dark." Footsteps moved away. Then the sound of something being dragged. Heavy. Metal. The engine of their car tried to start. Failed. Again. And again. Whoever was outside had done something to it. That's when Mark realized the truth. This cabin wasn't for privacy. It was for isolation. They didn't sleep. At dawn they ran. Barely made it a mile before a ranger truck found them walking on the road. The ranger listened quietly, then said something that stuck with them forever. "There hasn't been a rental cabin on that road in years." The listing disappeared 2 days later. The cabin? Burned down in a controlled fire. No explanation given. Just another spot in the woods where no one goes anymore. Harold and Evelyn had been married for 47 years. By the time they booked the trip, they weren't looking for adventure, just quiet. Fresh air. Somewhere far from traffic, phones, and neighbors who played music too loud at night. Evelyn found the cabin online. The listing promised seclusion, nature, and complete privacy. The photos showed a small wooden cabin surrounded by trees so dense it looked like the forest had swallowed it whole. No nearby roads. No other buildings. Harold hesitated at first. "No reviews," he said. Evelyn smiled. "That's how you know it's peaceful." They booked a 3-night stay. Arrival. The drive took longer than expected. The paved road eventually turned into gravel, then dirt. Their GPS lost signal 15 minutes before they reached the cabin. The last mile felt wrong. Trees closing in, branches brushing against the sides of the car, the air growing heavier the farther they went. When the cabin finally appeared, it looked older than the photos. Still standing strong but worn. Weathered wood. A porch that sagged slightly in the middle. Windows dark, like eyes that hadn't blinked in a while. Inside, everything smelled faintly of dust and damp wood. But it was clean. Too clean. No personal items. No decorations. Just furniture. A fireplace. A small TV with a built-in VCR beneath it. Something Harold hadn't seen in years. "Who still uses tapes?" he muttered. They unpacked, cooked dinner, and settled in as the sun disappeared behind the trees. Night fell fast out there. No streetlights, no distant glow, just darkness pressing against the windows. That was when Evelyn suggested exploring the basement. The basement. The door was hidden behind a bookshelf in the hallway. Harold noticed it when he leaned against the shelf and felt it shift slightly. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The basement smelled old. Not moldy, stale. Like air that hadn't moved in years. Against the far wall sat a large wooden box. Cracked. Dusty. Heavy. Inside were dozens of VHS tapes. No labels. No dates. Just plain black cassettes. Evelyn laughed nervously. Probably old home movies. Harold didn't like the way they were stacked so neatly, all facing the same direction, like someone had taken care of them. They brought 2 tapes upstairs. "Just one," Evelyn said. "Then bed." The first tape. The screen flickered to life. Static. Then an image. The cabin. Their cabin. Same porch. Same trees. Same angle, like the camera had been set on a tripod across the clearing. The footage was dated 1994. They watched as a younger couple stepped into frame, laughing, unloading bags from a car. Evelyn's smile faded. "That's this place," she whispered. The tape jumped forward. Night footage now, shot from inside the cabin. The camera moved slowly, deliberately, through the hallway, past the same bookshelf, past the same staircase. The person filming paused outside a bedroom door. You could hear breathing, not the people sleeping, the cameraman's. Harold reached for the remote. "Turn it off." But Evelyn couldn't look away. The tape cut again. Morning. Police lights flashing through the trees. The tape ended. Neither of them spoke. The second tape. They should have stopped. They didn't. The second tape was dated 2007. Another couple. Different faces. Same cabin. This time the footage wasn't steady. It shook like the camera was handheld. The person filming whispered constantly, things too quiet to fully understand. The tape cut to night. Scratching sounds. Soft knocking. The camera aimed at the front door from inside the cabin. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. The couple on screen argued in hushed voices about whether to answer. They never did. The tape ended with screaming. Then silence. Then static. Evelyn was crying. Harold turned the TV off. "That's enough," he said. "They're fake. Some kind of sick project." But his voice shook. Going to bed. They double-checked every lock. Every window. The front door. The back door. Harold even wedged a chair beneath the handle. "Just paranoid," he told himself. They climbed into bed around midnight. The cabin settled. Creaks. Pops. Normal sounds of an old building. Then came something else. A sound that didn't belong. Footsteps. Outside. Slow. Crunching leaves. Circling the cabin. Evelyn squeezed Harold's hand. "Tell me you hear that." Before he could answer, knock, 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 from the front door. Not loud, not aggressive, polite, controlled, exactly like the tape. The knocking moved. Side window, back door, another window, like someone testing each entrance. Then a sound from below them, the basement door, opening. They stayed frozen until morning. The final discovery. At dawn, the noises stopped. They didn't sleep. They packed in silence. Before leaving, Harold did one last thing. He went back to the basement. One tape sat apart from the rest. Labeled 2026. He didn't tell Evelyn. They left. The listing was gone by the time they reached the main road. Weeks later, Harold checked missing persons reports. Every couple from the tapes. Gone. No suspects. No bodies. And sometimes, late at night, Evelyn swears she hears soft knocking. 3 times. From inside their own home. I've gone back and forth for a long time about whether to tell the story. Not because I don't remember it clearly. I remember everything. The sounds. The smells. The way time stretched and folded in on itself. The reason I hesitated is because once you hear it, you can't unhear it. And if you've ever stayed in a cabin or planned to, it might make you think twice about how alone you really are. This happened last fall. The cabin belonged to my granddad. He gave it to me when I was 7 years old, which sounds strange, but my granddad was like that. He believed in giving responsibility early. The cabin sat deep in the woods, about an hour from the nearest paved road, and even longer from the closest town. No cell service. No neighbors. Just trees, wind, and the sound of insects that never seemed to sleep. Growing up, I spent almost every summer there with him. He taught me how to split wood, how to fish the creek without scaring the trout, how to tell time by the sun when watches failed. But the thing he drilled into me more than anything else was this. If something ever feels wrong here, he said, you don't run. You hide. I didn't understand what he meant until years later. The cabin itself wasn't big. One bedroom, a small kitchen, a living room with a stone fireplace that always smelled faintly of smoke no matter how long it had been since the last fire. There was also a trapdoor in the floor of the bedroom. It was hidden under a loose plank and an old rug. You wouldn't notice it unless you knew exactly where to step. That space beneath the floor wasn't a basement. It was barely tall enough to crouch in. Dirt floor, reinforced beams, a small air vent that ran out behind the roots of an old oak tree. My granddad built it himself decades ago. Only 2 people knew about it. Him and me. He showed it to me when I was 7, made me crawl inside, then closed the hatch and waited a full minute before opening it again. So you understand, he said. This is not a place you play. This is a place you survive. I hadn't thought about that space in years, until the night I needed it. I arrived at the cabin late on a Friday evening. I'd planned a quiet weekend. No internet, no phone calls, just decompression. Work had been brutal, and I needed somewhere that felt untouched. The drive-in was normal. No strange cars, no broken gates, just the usual gravel road and the feeling of entering a different world. I unlocked the cabin, stepped inside, and immediately noticed something felt off. Not wrong, just different. The air smelled stale but stronger than usual, like the place had been shut up too tightly. I chalked it up to my imagination. Old cabins always feel eerie at night. I unloaded my things, lit a few lanterns, and started a fire. The familiar crackle helped calm me down. Around 9:30 p.m., I heard the first sound. Footsteps. Not outside. Inside. At first, I told myself it was the wood settling or the fire popping. Cabins make noise. But then I heard it again. A deliberate step, slow, careful, came from the back of the cabin. My heart started hammering so hard I felt it in my throat. I stood still, barely breathing. Then I heard a voice. Low, male, whispering. There's supposed to be someone here. Every muscle in my body locked up. I hadn't heard a door open. I hadn't heard a window break, which meant one thing. They were already inside. I turned off the lantern nearest to me, plunging the room into shadow except for the firelight. My brain screamed at me to run, but my granddad's voice cut through the panic. You don't run. You hide. I moved slowly, quietly, toward the bedroom. That's when I heard another voice. There, by the fireplace. A beam of light swept across the living room wall. Flashlights, plural. There were at least 2 of them. I didn't hesitate anymore. I slipped into the bedroom, closed the door as softly as I could, pulled the rug aside, and lifted the plank. The trapdoor opened without a sound. I climbed down, pulled it closed above me, and pressed myself into the darkness. Seconds later, the bedroom door opened. I could hear everything. Boots on wood. The creak of the bed frame. One of them laughed quietly. Definitely someone stayed here. My breathing sounded thunderous in my ears. I forced myself to slow it, shallow breaths through my nose. A flashlight beam passed directly over the spot where the trapdoor was hidden. They never noticed. For the next 2 hours, they searched the cabin. 2 hours felt like an entire lifetime. They went through everything. Cabinets, drawers, my bag. I heard glass clink when they opened a bottle I'd brought. At one point, one of them stood directly over me. I could see the outline of his boots through a thin crack between the planks. "Where do you think they went?" one asked. "They didn't," the other replied. "They're here." My stomach dropped. They started knocking on the walls. Hard, methodical, listening. Each knock sent dust raining down into my hair. Then came the worst part. The bedroom. They moved the rug. I watched, frozen, as a sliver of light cut through the crack near the hatch. One of them paused. "Floor feels weird here." I bit down on my sleeve to keep from making a sound. Another voice responded, irritated. "It's an old cabin. Everything feels weird." There was a long silence. Then footsteps moved away. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. Eventually, I heard the front door open. Cold night air rushed in. Then the engine of a vehicle starting. Gravel crunching. Fading. I stayed hidden for another full hour after the last sound disappeared. When I finally climbed out, my legs barely worked. The cabin looked like a tornado had gone through it. Drawers dumped. Furniture shifted. Mud on the floor that wasn't mine. I left that night. I didn't clean up. I didn't pack properly. I just drove. The next day I reported it. The police found no fingerprints, no forced entry, no suspects, but they did find something. Behind the cabin, near the oak tree, fresh boot prints, right where the air vent exits. They were facing it, as if someone had stood there, listening. I still own the cabin. I haven't slept there since. Sometimes I think about my granddad, about why he built that space, about what he might have experienced that made him teach a 7-year-old how to disappear. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder something worse. What if they knew about the hiding spot and just wanted me to think they did? I didn't plan to go back. For months after that night, I avoided even thinking about the cabin. I told myself it was over, that whoever broke in had been opportunists, maybe hunters or thieves who stumbled onto a place they thought was empty. That explanation was comforting, convenient, but it never fully explained one thing. The boot prints. They weren't random. They weren't passing through. They were positioned deliberately behind the oak tree, right where the air vent exited the ground. Whoever stood there wasn't looking at the cabin. They were listening to it. I tried to convince myself it meant nothing. Still, I started having the same dream over and over again. I'd be back in the hiding space, counting my breaths. Only this time, instead of footsteps moving away, I'd hear a quiet voice directly above me saying, "We know you're down there." I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, ears ringing with silence. After the 5th time I had that dream, I realized something else was wrong. My granddad had never told me why he built the hiding place, and that bothered me more than the break-in itself. I went through his old things. My granddad had passed away years earlier, and most of his belongings were still boxed in my garage. Tools, fishing gear, maps, notebooks. He wrote everything down. Weather patterns, repairs, hunting logs. At the bottom of one box, wrapped in a flannel shirt, I found a small leather journal I'd never seen before. No label, no date. The first page just said, "If you're reading this, trust your instincts." My stomach tightened. The journal wasn't a diary. It was more like observations. Short entries. Some pages blank. Some filled with rushed handwriting. One entry stood out immediately. Heard movement again tonight. Not animals. Too careful. Another, written years later. They don't come every season. They watch. They wait. I flipped pages faster now. Never confront. Never let them know you see them. Cabin is not as hidden as it feels. Then, near the back. If they ever enter while you're inside, the space will save you. Only if you stay silent. I closed the journal and just sat there. My granddad hadn't built the hiding place for fun. He built it because someone or some people had been watching that cabin long before I was born. That should have been enough to keep me away forever. Instead, it did the opposite. I needed to know if whatever scared him was still out there. So, against every logical instinct I had, I went back. I chose a weekday in early spring. Fewer hunters. Fewer hikers. I told exactly one person where I was going, just in case, and left my phone in the car once I lost service. Same as always. The drive-in felt longer than I remembered. Every snap twig sounded too loud. Every shadow between the trees felt like it held something just out of sight. When the cabin came into view, my chest tightened. Nothing looked disturbed. No broken windows. No forced door. No fresh tracks that I could see. The place looked exactly the way I'd left it. Quiet, abandoned, patient. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not mold. Something metallic. I checked every room before setting my bag down. The bedroom, the kitchen, behind the door, inside the shower, even the hiding spot. I lifted the plank and shined a flashlight inside. Empty, undisturbed. The dust layer hadn't been touched. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For a while, nothing happened. I cleaned up a little, swept broken glass from the last time, reset furniture, tried to make the place feel livable again. Around dusk, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the tree line. That's when I noticed something I'd never seen before. Markers. Small ones. Subtle. A strip of cloth tied high on a branch. 3 rocks stacked unnaturally near the creek. A shallow notch carved into a tree trunk facing the cabin. Trail signs. My pulse quickened. These weren't recent. Some were weathered. Old. Which meant whoever made them had been coming back here for a long time. Maybe decades. As the sun dropped, the forest changed. Birds went quiet first. Then the insects. The silence pressed in, thick and unnatural. I went inside and locked the door. That was my first mistake. The knocking started around 10:17 p.m. 3 knocks. Slow. Controlled. Not aggressive. I froze. The knocking came again. 3 knocks. A pause. Then a voice. Calm. Male. Close to the door. We know someone's here. My heart slammed against my ribs. I didn't respond. I turned off the lantern and backed away from the door. Every step measured. The voice spoke again. You can come out. We just want to talk. I felt sick. There was more than one of them. I could hear movement on the porch. Footsteps shifting positions. They weren't trying to break in. They were trying to get me to reveal myself. Then something else happened. The voice lowered. You hid last time. That was smart. My blood went cold. They knew. Before I could react, the handle on the door slowly turned. Locked. They tried the windows next. One by one. Testing. Patient. I didn't wait. I went straight to the bedroom, lifted the rug, and opened the hatch. As I climbed down, I heard glass crack. not shatter, just enough to open. I pulled the door closed above me just as footsteps entered the cabin. This time there were at least 3 of them. The search felt different than before, more focused. They weren't rummaging randomly. They were checking specific places, measuring spaces, talking quietly to each other like professionals. "He's alone," one said. "How do you know?" "No extra tracks." Another voice chuckled softly. "Still makes it easier." I curled tighter into myself, forcing my breathing into slow, shallow pulls. Then came the sound I was dreading. The rug moving. Silence. A hand pressed against the floor directly above me. Not knocking. Feeling. Testing for hollow space. I pressed my face into the dirt and didn't move. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Finally, the hand pulled away. "Nothing," the voice said. A pause. Then footsteps retreated. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. Then I heard something that made my heart nearly stop. Someone moved outside. Behind the cabin. Near the oak tree. Near the vent. I realized, in that moment, what my granddad had meant. The hiding place only works if they don't block the air. I stopped breathing altogether. Listened. Footsteps approached the vent. Then stopped. A voice whispered, muffled by earth. I hear him. I don't know how long I stayed there after that. Time lost meaning. Eventually, the footsteps left. Engines started. Faded. I stayed hidden until dawn. When I finally emerged, I was shaking so badly I had to sit on the floor. They hadn't taken anything. They hadn't damaged the cabin. But they left something behind. On the kitchen table, a small carving made of wood. An oak leaf, perfectly shaped. A symbol, a message. We know where you are. I locked the cabin, walked to my car, and never looked back. I sold the land 3 months later. Didn't advertise. Didn't negotiate. I just wanted it gone. Sometimes, though, I still wonder what would have happened if my granddad hadn't taught me how to hide. And sometimes I wonder something even worse. What if the hiding place wasn't built to keep people out, but to keep whoever was watching from realizing how many times someone had survived?